If you think you've heard every bedtime story, wait until you hear mine. One rainy evening, my little grandson made an offer so simple and so brave that it undid me right there by the doorway. I'm 70, set in my routines, sure of how nights are supposed to go. Pill bottle by the lamp, book on the nightstand, prayers said quietly to the man I loved and lost. But then Luke spoke, and the whole script changed. What he asked for was innocent. What it gave me was a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. And yes, I cried, you'll understand why by the end. Before I start, tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing your cities. Drop them in the comments. Are you in Dallas, Phoenix, Cincinnati, or some small town with one diner and a football team that still plays under lights on Friday nights? Say hello. I'm Kayla, and this is a true story about the gentlest twist in the road. It was a soft, steady rain that night, the kind that turns the whole house into a drum if you listen long enough. My daughter and her husband had gone to a work dinner, so Luke and I had the evening to ourselves. We ate an early supper, macaroni with too much cheese and a handful of peas, because I still pretend that makes it healthy. And we watched the first half of an old ball game I'd recorded a decade ago. Luke doesn't care much for baseball yet, but he likes the way I talk about the players as if I know them, the way men do. What they're thinking in the batter's box, how the pitcher's shoulder tells you the pitch before it leaves his hand. He listens, chin in hand, as if I'm telling him something secret and useful. You should know this about me. At 70, I can still carry grocery bags in one trip if I need to, but my right hip sings its own little sorrow at night. The doctor says it's just a chorus of birthdays. I take my pills and I stretch, and I try to pretend it's nothing. But the quiet hour when the dishes are drying and the house exhales, that's when missing my husband sneaks in. His name was Daniel, and I still feel the weight of his hand at the small of my back when I lean over the sink. Grief is funny that way. It finds you doing small things and sits with you until you notice. After the game, I nudged Luke toward the hallway. He is 9 years old and made of elbows and curiosity. He brushed his teeth with dramatic sound effects, the way boys do when they want an audience. While he rinsed, I tittied the living room, the scattered crayons, the dinosaur book face down like it had fainted from too many adventures. I switched off the TV, and the house fell into the hush of rain and refrigerator hum. "All right, Captain," I said. "Bedtime." He raised his eyebrows. "Can I pick the story tonight?" "Deal," I said. "No monsters." "No monsters," he agreed, holding up a hand like we were swearing in at court. We walked down the hall past the photographs, my parents in black and white, Daniel in his service uniform, my daughter on her wedding day, and the most recent one, Luke with 2 missing teeth and a cowlick that refused to obey gravity. His room smells like cedar shavings and laundry soap. The bedsheet is a map of the stars. When we first bought it, he asked me if Orion could see him sleep, and I said, of course he can. He's been keeping watch for thousands of years. Luke scrambled into bed and then popped back out, because 9-year-olds are made of springs. "I forgot my nightlight," he said, and grabbed the little astronaut that glows a friendly blue. I settled into the chair by his bed, the one that used to be in Daniel's office. The cushion still has a stubborn dip where he used to sit, as if memory has weight. "Tonight," Luke announced, "I'm reading to you." He held up a book about a boy who builds a treehouse with his grandpa. He looked at me like a lawyer who anticipates objections. "I thought I was the reader," I said. "Not tonight. You look tired." In my experience, men don't always hear when someone says, "You look tired," but boys, good boys, notice. They notice when your hands linger on the banister, when you pause before standing, when the rain makes you stare past the window instead of at your reflection. I could have waved him off, but I didn't. Something about the way he squared his little shoulders, like he'd practiced in a mirror, made me say yes with my whole chest. "Okay," I said. "I'd like that." He climbed back into bed and opened the book, clearing his throat like an old preacher about to begin a homily. He followed the words with his finger, halting at the big ones: perseverance, blueprint, waiting for me to supply them with a nod. His voice was small but steady. I watched his lashes, the way they cast skinny shadows on his cheeks. The rain tapped against the window like a patient guest with no intention of leaving. Halfway through, he looked up. "Grandma?" "Yes, baby." "Does your hip hurt at night?" I could have lied. Instead, I told the truth men respect. Some nights more than others. He shut the book softly and looked around the room, thinking. This is where the unexpected arrived, quiet as a cat, no fanfare. He slid out of bed and padded to my chair, put a hand on my knee, and said, "Can we trade? You sleep in my bed tonight. It's softer. I'll sit here and read until you sleep, like Grandpa used to with me when I was littler. Is that okay?" There it was. Not some grand gesture hammered from big words, just an innocent offer. A boy's bed, a blue nightlight, the promise to keep watch. I felt the sting in my throat before I knew I was crying. It wasn't the offer itself, it was what it meant. That he'd noticed. That he wanted to carry a corner of my load. That in the simplest way he could think of, he was trying to be a protector, not by puffing up or talking loud, but by staying, by sitting, by reading. "I don't want you to be uncomfortable," I started. He shook his head. "I'm not. I'm being on duty." On duty. I can hear the men nodding right now. There's a way boys learn what it means to be strong that has nothing to do with muscles. It's the quiet kind you practice when no one's cheering. "All right," I said, my voice not as steady as I intended. "If you're sure." "I'm sure." He turned the blanket down, the one with the stitched moon in the corner, and patted the pillow like a hotel bellhop. "I warmed it," he added proudly, though of course he hadn't done anything but benign and radiant heat. It's a strange thing to climb into a child's bed at 70. You feel enormous, like a ship pulled into a tiny harbor. The mattress sighed. The nightlight washed the ceiling in sea blue. My hip found a place that made its complaint quieter. Luke fetched the worn cardigan I like and tucked it around my shoulders without my asking. He set the book on his knees and settled into the chair like a sentry. "Okay," he said. "Close your eyes." "Bossy," I teased. He smiled without losing his seriousness. Grandpa used to say that to me. I closed my eyes. He began again, the story of beams and nails, of measuring twice and cutting once. He stumbled, recovered, tried again. Every few pages, he glanced at me to make sure I was still there. The rain drummed up a rhythm with his small voice, and somewhere between the boy in the book and the boy in the chair, my breaths lengthened. The old ache in my chest, the one grief leaves like a footprint, rose up and softened. I thought about the day Daniel taught our daughter to change a tire in the driveway. He showed her where to put her weight so the wrench would surrender. "You don't have to be strong," he said. "You have to be steady." She was 15 and rolling her eyes, and I stood at the kitchen window and loved him so much it felt like standing too close to the sun. That word came back to me now, tucked inside Luke's offer like a note in a lunchbox. Steady. When the book ended, Luke didn't announce it. He let the last sentence settle and then whispered, "Do you want me to start another?" "I'll tell you a secret," I said, eyes still closed. "Sometimes I count the things I'm grateful for until I fall asleep. It's slower than sheep." "Okay," he said, and the chair creaked as he leaned forward. "Can I do it with you?" Of course. We took turns, like passing a baseball in an easy game of catch. Warm socks, I said. Rain noises, he answered. Your mother's laugh. Chocolate chip pancakes. Orion watching the window. Being on duty, he added, a little shy. I didn't say Daniel's name out loud. I didn't have to. Gratitude has a way of calling who it needs. At some point, the house changed from rain to the kind of quiet that happens only after midnight, when even the appliances seem to hold their breath. I opened my eyes. Luke had slid lower in the chair, the book tented on his chest, the nightlight catching one sneaker left untied. I reached for the blanket at the foot of the bed and draped it across him. The chair squeaked a tiny thank you. I could have woken him, marched him back to his bed like a responsible adult. But there is a holiness in some arrangements you don't disturb. I left him there, on duty, the way boys become men, by choosing to stay. My hip had gone quiet entirely, which felt like a miracle I could actually use. And then, because I'm me, I whispered into the dark, "Thank you, God, for sending him to sit with me tonight." If you've got your own way of saying thanks, I respect that. Maybe you say it to the ceiling or to the memory of your father or to the echo of your own younger self. What mattered was the saying. Before sleep took me, Luke stirred and said something that I will carry tucked in my pocket for the rest of my days. It was small enough to miss if you weren't listening. He didn't even open his eyes. "Grandma," he said, "if you get scared again, wake me up. It's okay to need me a little." There it was, the other half of his offer. Permission. Not just to take his bed for a night, but to lean on him when the dark tried its old tricks. I lay there with tears running into my hairline, the way tears sneak when you're lying down. Not sad tears, mending tears, like someone had threaded a needle and was tugging the seam of me back together. If you've lived long enough, you know the world talks a lot about big bravery. It's on billboards and in speeches. But the kind that saves you, late at night, is usually small and close and wearing untied sneakers. The kind that asks, not commands. The kind that says, "Is this okay?" and waits for your yes. I woke just before dawn, that pale hour when the birds are talking about their plans but haven't left the branches yet. My hip felt as calm as a lake. The house was a soft blue, and the nightlight astronaut had gone to sleep on his own. Luke was crumpled like a letter in the chair, hair sticking up where it had negotiated with the blanket and lost. I didn't move. I lay there and let the morning come find me. The rain had gone, and in its place a quiet I hadn't felt in a long time. If you're a man watching this, maybe you know the feeling I mean, the one you get when a job is done right, not flashy, just right. Tightened bolt, steady beam, something that will hold. There's more to tell about the promise we made over pancakes, about the box of letters I finally opened with him at the table, about a phone call I'd been avoiding that I dialed at last, because he reminded me I wasn't alone in the hallway between rooms. But that's the next part of the story. For now, I'll leave you in that blue-gray room with the quilt pulled up and the little boy on duty in his grandfather's chair, and a 70-year-old woman finally letting herself be cared for without apologizing. If an offer comes tonight, small, sincere, unexpected, I hope you say yes to it too. The morning after that night with Luke felt different, though at first I couldn't quite put my finger on why. The house looked the same. Sunlight filtering through the curtains, the refrigerator humming, the faint creak of the wood floors under my slippers. But something in me had shifted. My chest felt lighter, as though some invisible weight had finally rolled off and left me free to breathe deeply again. I moved slowly into the kitchen, the old kettle rattling just a little on the burner as it heated. Coffee has always been my anchor. I make it the same way every day, dark, with just enough cinnamon to remind me of Daniel's laugh on Saturday mornings. The smell alone is enough to summon memories, the kind that don't sting anymore, but wrap themselves around you like an old quilt. As I poured steaming milk into Luke's glass and set it at his place, I heard the familiar shuffle of his small feet. He stumbled in, blanket still draped around his shoulders, hair every which way. His eyes were heavy but proud, like a man who had worked a long shift and was reporting for breakfast. "Morning, Grandma," he mumbled, collapsing into the chair. "Morning, Captain on duty," I said, sliding the glass to him. "I see you made it through the night." His grin broke across his sleepy face, all teeth and freckles. "I told you I could." He sipped his milk with a seriousness that made me laugh. He looked at me carefully, studying me in a way I wasn't used to. "Did my bed help? Did you sleep?" I sat across from him, folded my hands, and answered truthfully. "I slept better than I have in years." That was the honest truth. For the first time in a long while, I hadn't woken with my hip burning or my chest tight from memories. I had simply rested. He beamed. "Told you. My bed's magic." I laughed softly. "No, Luke. You're the magic." He tilted his head, puzzled, but I could see the pride blooming in his eyes. Boys that age want to be important, to be strong, to matter. And last night he had. Later, after breakfast, we carried our plates to the sink. I let him wash while I dried. He hummed to himself, splashing more than necessary, but I didn't mind. There was a rhythm to it. Him at the sink, me with the towel, that reminded me of years gone by, of my own children with sleeves rolled up beside me. I felt Daniel's presence there too, not as an ache, but as a quiet warmth. When we finished, Luke wandered into the living room. His eyes landed on the wooden box on the bookshelf. The box had sat untouched for years. Inside it were Daniel's letters, tied neatly in faded ribbon. I hadn't been able to open it since the day of his funeral. "Grandma," Luke said softly, pointing at it. "What's in there?" For a moment, my throat closed. Normally, I would have brushed him off. Just old papers, I might have said, or nothing important. But something about last night, the way he'd watched over me, the way he'd given me a gift without even realizing, made me brave enough to answer honestly. "Those are letters," I said. "Letters your grandpa wrote to me a long time ago." Luke's eyes widened. "Can we read them?" I hesitated, my hands trembling slightly. I had kept them sealed away, afraid of the storm they might unleash. But maybe, just maybe, it was time. "Yes," I whispered, surprising even myself. "We can." I carried the box to the table and opened the lid. The scent of old paper and ink rose up, fragile but familiar, like voices from another room. Luke leaned in, his chin nearly touching the table, as I untied the ribbon around the first bundle. The first letter was dated 45 years ago. Daniel's handwriting leaped off the page, steady and sure. I read aloud, "Kayla, don't forget to laugh when the days get heavy. Remember the sound of the rain. It always reminded me of your voice. And never forget, I love you more than the stars could ever count." The words blurred for a moment as tears welled up, but Luke reached across and laid his small hand over mine. "He was talking to you," he said quietly, "but also to me. He wanted me to take care of you." I swallowed hard. Yes, sweetheart, I think he did. We read letter after letter. Some were short notes about missing home. Others were long, filled with stories of faraway places and dreams for the future. Each word carried Daniel's voice, alive again in our kitchen. And as we read, I noticed Luke's posture change. He sat taller